In this tutorial, I will show you how to texture bake normal maps in Blender. Now, if you'd like to learn the basics of texture baking in Blender, then you can check out my texture baking for beginners tutorial with the link in the description, and you can also check out my texture baking tutorial playlist where I have more texture baking tutorials. And this here is from my procedural solar panels material, links in the description if you'd like to check that out. So the first thing that we need to do is add an image to bake to. So I have the shader editor right here. So I'm just going to press Shift A. I'm going to go here to the search and I'm going to search for an image texture. And I'm going to stick the image texture right here above the principled shader. So now we need to actually create a new image texture that we can bake the normal map to. So I'm going to click on the new button right here and I can just rename this Solar Panels Normal. Now right here on the width and height, you can change this to change the resolution of the texture. I usually like to bake to 4K textures. The default is 1K, but if you want to change it to 4K, you can click and then drag down and then let go. And this way you can change both values at the same time. And I'm going to type in 4096 and then hit enter. And this is the standard resolution for a 4K texture. And then it doesn't matter what the color is because the texture baking will bake over the color. And then I can just click on OK. Now something that's really important is that I take the color space here and I change this from sRGB to non-color. And that is because this is going to be a normal map and the normal map isn't going to contribute to the base color of the material. We're going to be putting it into the normal of the shader. So anything that isn't contributing to the color of the material needs to be set to non-color. So I'm just going to set this to non-color. Now the next thing that we need to do is UV unwrap the object onto the image texture. So to do this, I'm actually going to click on the plus right here to add a new workspace because I don't actually have a UV editing workspace, and I'm going to go here to general and go to UV editing. So you can just click over on the UV editing layout. And then I am going to scroll right over here on the UV editor and I'm going to click right here and I'm going to add the solar panels normal just so that I can see that texture. And then if I press the A key to select everything, you can see this is already nicely UV unwrapped. So the object is just UV unwrapped on the texture. Of course, this is a very simple object, but for more complex objects, you might need to add seams and then do the UV unwrapping. Or you could also do the Smart UV project. And if you'd like to learn the basics of UV unwrapping in Blender, then you can check out my UV unwrapping for beginners tutorial, links in the description, but just make sure your object has a decent UV unwrap and make sure there aren't any overlapping islands in the UV editor. So I'm going to click right back over here to the shading tab. So we now need to go over the bake settings. So I'm going to click right over here to go to the render properties. And when you are baking, you need to make sure that you use the cycles rendering engine because baking isn't supported in Blender Eevee. Now, if your 3D scene is in Blender Eevee, that's totally fine. You just need to switch it over to cycles and then do the baking. And then once you're done with the baking, you can turn it back to Eevee. But for now, leave it to cycles. Now, if you open up the sampling tab right here, if you turn the render samples down, then the bake is going to actually bake faster because when it's baking it does actually use the render samples. So if you open up the sampling tab and open up the render, I'm going to turn the samples to 10 so it's just a very small amount of samples and that way it'll render really quickly. Alright, so I can now close the sampling tab and I'm going to open up the bake tab right here. And again, make sure you're in the cycles rendering engine because this baking tab won't be in Blender Eevee. So we need to click here on the bake type and we want to bake the normal, so I'm going to click here on normal. And by changing the bake type to normal, it's going to bake whatever data is going into the normal of the shader. And then to preview what the bake looks like when it finishes, I'm going to bring my mouse right up here when the crosshair appears and I can click and drag down and this is going to split the window. And then I can click right up here to change the editor type and I'm going to change this to the image editor. And then if I click right here on the drop down, I can change this to the solar panels normal. So this way, once it bakes, we'll actually be able to preview what it looks like. So then before you actually bake the material, you need to make sure you have the correct object selected in the 3D viewport. And then also something that's really important is to make sure you have the image texture selected in the shader editor. And by having this image selected, you're telling Blender that this is the image that you want to bake to. So make sure the object is selected, make sure the image texture is selected. You can press Ctrl S to save the Blender file. And then we already set the bake type to normal. So I can now click on the bake button and it shouldn't take very long. It will depend on how powerful your computer is, but you can see it baked really fast for me. So there we go. So there is the normal map. So you can see it's one of those kind of blue, pink, and purple maps. So now we need to save this to an image file on our computer. So I'm going to click right up here on image, and then I'm going to click on save as. And I will just save this image as solarpanelsnormal.png. You could also use a JPEG if you want to, but I'm going to set it to a PNG image, and then I will click on save as. So now that we've saved this image to an image texture on our computer, if we close this Blender file, we won't lose the data because we've saved the image. So we can now drag this image texture down here, and we can plug it into the normal and replace it for the other data. So I'm going to take the color here from the image texture, and we're going to put that into the normal, and then we need to convert this to normal data because you can see this is color, but then this is going into the normal. So we need to add a normal map node here. So I'm going to press Shift A, I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for the normal map node, and we just want to stick the normal map node in between the shader and the image. So the color can go into the color, this way it's going to convert it to normal data, and then the normal can go into the normal of the shader. And there we have it. So now if I look up really closely, you can definitely see that normal popping out. And so now this is using a baked texture for the normal map. And as I mentioned earlier, before we baked this, it is important to make sure the color space is set to non-color because this isn't actually contributing to the base color, it is contributing to the normal. So that is it. That is how you bake normal maps in Blender. And if you'd like to learn the basics of texture baking in Blender, then definitely check out my texture baking for beginners tutorial. Link is in the description. And if you'd like to learn how to bake other maps in Blender, like emission maps and roughness maps and metallic maps, then you can check out my texture baking tutorial playlist with the link in the description, where I have many other texture baking tutorials. And if you'd like to help support me and this channel, I'll also have links in the description to my Gumroad and my Patreon and the YouTube memberships. And I do appreciate your support. But I hope you found this helpful, and thank you for watching.